Welcome to the Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Fit, the all-in-one AI-powered corporate wellness platform developed by Vantage Circle.
Emotions are a very significant part of our lives. We feel sadness, we feel joy, we feel anxiety, we feel excitement. There is a whole range of emotions we go through in our daily lives. But processing those emotions in productive ways is something very challenging and very crucial for maintaining our emotional well-being and building healthy relationships. In this episode of Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast, we are going to talk about processing our emotions in healthy and productive ways. I'm your host Dipshi, and today I have with me an HR professional and a certified corporate wellness specialist, Ashutosh Thatte. Welcome to the show, Ashutosh.
Thank you so much, Dipshi. It's an honor to be a part of your podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me.
We are so glad to have you here today, Ashutosh. So before beginning with our topic for today, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us about your wellness journey?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Ashutosh Thatte, and I am actually a human resource professional with approximately 15 years of work experience. And over the last 3 years, I would say just a year before COVID-19 was a reality, I wanted to specialize in the wellness and the well-being space, which kind of led me to do a professional certification called CCWS, which is the Certified Corporate Wellness Specialist. It's a certification that kind of accredits you to be certified as a corporate wellness and well-being practitioner and professional. So my wellness journey actually began earlier in 2019, like I was saying before the pandemic, and I thought to give it a little more focus and a sense of robustness, I thought of pursuing the CCWS program, which has actually greatly helped me in not only understanding what is happening within the wellness and well-being arena on a global level, but also helped me shape the existing wellness and well-being programs that I'm running for my organization at this point, not just for India, but also for the APAC market at large. Apart from that, of course, I am, an HR business partner to the company that I currently work with. We're, of course, specialists in the PR and the integrated communication space. And of course, I lead the HR business partnering vertical for the company at the moment at an India level.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh, for sharing your amazing wellness experience with us. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself very fortunate to have worked with the right set of people who have given, given wellness and well-being importance. I think in today's day and age, it's not a should have, it's a must have.
Mm-hmm.
There is a certain amount of criticality. And a lot of organizations out there are really looking at all of their HR practices and best practices and putting it through a wellness lens, so to say. So I think it's not, like I said, a should have, but a must have for most companies now to focus on. And I would say, especially post pandemic, things are very different.
Mm-hmm.
I know we say post pandemic as if COVID is not a reality. I know it's very much a reality in today's time as well, but I think, we're kind of past, I would say, the bad phase, so to say. But as we navigate coming back into offices, hybrid working, it brings about its own share of challenges. And I think having a good wellness strategy in that reason is actually, supremely important for most organizations today.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Even post-pandemic, every organization is coming up with some wellness program or another, and people are very much focused on on taking care of their own health.
Yeah.
And the employers are bringing in new initiatives, wellness initiatives, where they're engaging their employees in various wellness programs like walkathons, marathons,
Right.
etc.
Absolutely.
So let's come back to the topic, which is processing our emotions in healthy and productive ways.
Right.
So how can we recognize and acknowledge our emotions in a healthy and productive manner?
Right. So I think recognizing and acknowledging our emotions in a healthy and productive manner is an essential, it's quite an essential skill for your overall emotional well-being. There are some, pointers or strategies that I think one could adapt to help them achieve that. Fundamentally, of course, if you cultivate a certain sense of self-awareness, take time to check in with yourself regularly and pay attention to your emotional state. This is something that a lot of us don't do, because we get so engulfed in day-to-day work and day-to-day life that we oftentimes forget that what is more important for us to do is our own wellness and well-being. I always give this analogy because I heard one of my leaders use it during a training in which she said that, when you're in an airline, in case of turbulence, you're always instructed to wear your own gas mask before, or your oxygen mask before you help your passenger or your sort of your colleagues who are sitting next to you. So the case in point here is that you have to take care of yourself before you can be ready to take care of others. So I think cultivating that sense of self-awareness is extremely critical. Try to label your emotions. Give a name to what you're feeling. Oftentimes what happens is, when we're feeling a certain way, we try to shrug it under the carpet, saying, it's okay, this happens and it's nothing. We try to say it's fine and move on. But identifying your emotions can really help you gain clarity and understand what you're experiencing. Use a wide range of emotions and words to describe how you're feeling, whether you're feeling happy, you're feeling sad, you're feeling anxious, or even if you're feeling frustrated for that matter. I would also say maybe avoiding judgment, being able to express your emotions, reflecting and of course learning from those same emotions is equally important. And I think one of the things that a lot of people of course are talking about today, and it's not just for those who practice yoga and other forms of anti-stress workouts, but it's very important to practice mindfulness. I know this is something that's very it's easier said than done, and a lot of people preach, having mindfulness as part of your routine. But really, it does help to recognize and acknowledge emotions because it's more of an outside-in reflection, right? It's about what you're feeling. It's about being aware. It's about being present and non-judgmentally, being aware of your thoughts, your emotions, and your bodily sensations. So I really feel practicing mindfulness, even if it's a 5-minute routine a day or a 10-minute routine a day, it's oftentimes we misunderstand meditation as sitting cross-legged with your arms on your lap and closing your eyes and doing taking sort of bated breaths. But I think meditation can happen in any form. I mean, today, for example, if you're a singer or if you're an artist or if you're a dancer, just being immersed in your art form in itself is a form of meditation. So essentially disconnecting from what you're otherwise not doing, or disconnecting in a true sense of what your passion is and what you love, or what psychologists call a sense of nescience is really what is important and what is required. I think city dwellers like me, we barely get any time between our crazy commute times to the office and back, and otherwise over what happens to be pretty hectic weekends. This is just a matter of discipline. I mean, you can promise yourself 15 minutes for yourself. It's the most important thing that you can do, and if you make time for that, I think the rest of the day will just follow. And last but not the least, from this point specifically, I would say seek support when needed. If you're really finding it challenging to recognize or manage your emotions, consider taking help from a mental health professional. They can really provide you guidance, a clinical perspective. They can also teach you on different coping strategies and really help you develop much healthier emotional habits. Recognizing and acknowledging your emotions is definitely it's a continuous process that really takes practice, but you have to be patient with yourself. You can't go hard on yourself. And over a period of time, you will develop greater emotional intelligence and well-being.
And like in today's world, when everyone is busy with hectic schedules, we often neglect our mental health, right?
Yeah.
And we do not take care of ourselves. And in this process, we keep struggling with stress and various other negative emotions. So can you tell us some of the effective strategies for managing and processing those negative emotions which we go through?
Sure. So again, I mean, this is drawing from my own inferences of dealing with, situations where I have spoken to colleagues. And one of the things that I also want to sort of specify as a disclaimer that, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. But, I would say that being an HR professional, there is a very fine line that we often find ourselves, crossing, is from being advisors to being counselors, right? It does happen, especially when you're dealing with a largely, Gen Z workforce. For example, the organization that I represent, the average age group is 25 years. And the kind of challenges that they have at that level and at that age is very different from, say, a millennial or a Gen X, for example. But I would say that some of the effective strategies that I was, also mentored with in terms of how I could perhaps channel negative emotions as well is, I would say, areas like acceptance, which is about acknowledging and accepting your negative emotions without judgments, identifying, and also labeling the emotions, as I was mentioning earlier, practicing a certain amount of self-compassion, right? I mean, treat yourself with kindness. We're all human beings. We're bound to make mistakes, and it's absolutely fine to make mistakes. But if you keep negatively reassuring yourself of the experiences that you've had, you're always going to make more room for negativity to foster and to fester in you, right? Reflect as much as you can. I think people who ponder, people who brood over certain things often have a better perspective because they've really gone into themselves to find out what are some of the areas or what are the patterns or recurring themes as far as emotional experiences are concerned. And I think this self-reflection can definitely provide a lot of valuable insights to an individual to really help address these root causes. Maybe also, like I said earlier, seek support when needed. Seek social support if you don't have the means to seek clinical support in terms of therapy. Perhaps share your feelings with trusted friends, with family members or a therapist. Talking about your negative emotions can really provide relief, support, and different perspectives on the situation. I mean, see, again, this is something that I would probably tread with caution because sometimes too many situations and too many recommendations and perspectives is also confusing. So choose the ones that you really feel close to, the ones that you trust, and open up to them to have a non-judgmental point of view. I think that is probably more important here. And again, don't hesitate to reach out for support because people will be surprised to know that they're not the only ones going through what they're going through. I think with mental health, everyone is dealing with it at some point in time in their own journey. Of course, the effect of it could be different and could vary, but everyone's going through some of the other problems in life. Also, setting boundaries as far as negative emotions is found to be quite helpful, where you can identify and really establish healthy boundaries to protect yourself from situations or people that act as a trigger for certain negative emotions, right? So learning to say no, being a little more assertive, and creating those boundaries can also contribute to a much healthier emotional state of mind is what I feel. I think the last one, which is boundary setting, is especially important in today's day and age, especially from a corporate perspective, where we all become yes men and yes women to our clients, right? Without thinking how it's going to affect us and our bandwidth and our mental bandwidth. But yeah, in light of being client first, in light of being on top of things, we often overcommit and we say yes to things that in hindsight we should have said no to. So setting of boundaries is extremely critical, not just in terms of work, but also in terms of setting boundaries with certain people who you think are triggering certain emotions in you as an individual. So these are just some, I would say, effective techniques that one can deploy when managing and processing negative emotions.
The ability to say no is very important, especially in the current world we live in, because oftentimes if we cannot say no, we end up in trouble. Like most of the times it happens.
And correct. And we're also spoiled by choice, right? We have so many things to choose from today that it often becomes difficult to say no to one thing. So which is why I think setting of boundaries is critical.
Exactly. And when we are talking about speaking up, so I
Yeah.
believe it becomes very difficult for the introverts to come out of their shell and
Yeah.
express their emotions
Hmm.
and share it with their people. So I believe it's
Hmm.
way more difficult for them than the extroverts.
Yeah, I mean, you could say in general, by definition, that's their social style, right? I mean, introverts in general are a little more reclusive, are a little more, I would say, sort of confined to their thoughts, and they'd only associate when it's needed to associate. Unlike, an extrovert who's out there and bubbly and chirpy and loves interacting and mingling with everybody. Well, I mean, in terms of, I would say, a setting of boundaries is important for both. Even the ones who we consider, I would say, who are introverted, I think even for them to let people know that they don't appreciate, even if you're an extrovert, it doesn't mean you can come and talk to me because I consider myself to be a little introverted. But there are ways around that as well. And I think in an organizational context, it's, of course, it becomes a lot more difficult to navigate because an organization would require you to be especially, I mean, if I can talk on behalf of the HR function, you don't hear of many introverts in HR, right? HR people are considered to be extroverted because that's the nature of our job. We're a people function. And you can't be an introvert if you're in the human resource side of things. But we do deal with introverts when we're talking to, our employees or our colleagues. And there are ways, of course, to approach them. There are ways to deal with certain situations. But again, to answer your question, it's about making an effort is the way I would look at it.
Do you think having a counseling cell in every company, like in every office, helps, like for people who are struggling with something, they can just go and talk to the counselor one-on-one about their problems, and in return they can feel relief?
Most certainly, I think counseling is something that I believe in because I have also been a student of therapy for as long as I can remember. I think the general misnomer or stigma that exists in a lot of people today is that if you're undergoing therapy, that means something really wrong with you, right? And I think that's the stigma that you need to break. Sometimes, like I said, support comes in when you get a certain amount of guidance, coping strategies, clinical perspectives that your friends and family and well-wishers are not able to give you. Therapists help you look at different situations through different lenses and help you adapt to certain challenges which are otherwise very difficult. And I actually feel that, at least as far as corporate India is concerned, having, like you said, maybe a licensed therapist who's empaneled with your company, or at least having what we call an EAP, which is an employee assistance program, is extremely important today for any sized organization and any industry or any sort of domain. It doesn't matter. I think having an employee assistance program is the bare minimum because employees know that there is a service that is available should they need to seek assistance from someone. Because let's also face the fact that therapy is expensive, right? It's not something that everybody can afford. And, our erstwhile president, Dr. Ramnath Kovind had, I remember, quoted in 2019, that India was on the cusp of a mental health epidemic long before COVID-19 was a reality, right? So, he had mentioned then that we have sort of been on a cusp of a mental health epidemic for a long time, and there is a dearth of mental health professionals to patients in the country, which is why I feel that therapy is even more important, especially with the way things are evolving, whether you call it the advent of technology, AI, so on and so forth. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, doom and gloom about what's going to happen in the future. And I really think some people really need a clinical perspective on how to regulate and manage emotions and also cultivate that sort of self-awareness to different situations.
And when we are talking about seeking like professional help, so when do you think, like, what are those signs that indicate that we may need professional help in processing our emotions? Like all of us are struggling with something or the other, but when is that time that we know that, yes, it's time for us to seek therapy or counseling?
See, I mean, again, a simple analogy here is when you turn on a pressure cooker and you cook something in it, when the pressure builds up, it blows the whistle, right? Your body gives you signals when you know that pressure in your body has built up to a point where it has to come out. And sometimes it comes out in the form of anger, it comes out in the form of frustration, it comes out in the form of anxiety or panic attacks. It could have various physical manifestations as well, because at the end of the day, there is a body and mind connection when it comes to mental health. And I think that's when a lot of people, as they say, they get a rude awakening and they kind of decide that, okay, I really think I need to see someone, whether it is to do with intrusive thoughts, whether it is to do with feeling a sense of, gloom, whether it's a sense of feeling depressed. There are many avenues, or rather, I would say many instances, basis which your body signals you that it's really time for you to seek help and to seek, clinical guidance and clinical assessment before you are able to kind of make up, a diagnosis of what it is that you're going through. See, the thing is with mental health, unlike physical ailments, it doesn't come with any telltale warning signs, right? I mean, if you look at anxiety, for example, which is the most common, I would say, mental health concern, especially amongst the youth, and one that I am personally seeing in the corporate, environment as well. Sweaty palms, shaking, shortness of breath, cloudy judgment, cloudy mind, trembling. These are all telltale signs of anxiety. You're kind of overthinking situations, constantly playing out the situation in your mind. And that for a while you can kind of adapt and say, okay, this is human. Because remember, without anxiety, we would not have evolved as a species, right? Anxiety is nothing but the flight or fight response. It's a response to fear, and it's more outside than inside, right? It's triggered by external factors, right? If I'm stuck in the middle of an ocean, I might start feeling anxious because my body is preparing me to fight or flight, or in other words, sink or swim. But sometimes what happens is that's stress in its purest form. But anxiety is more about your mind overthinking, situations over and again, different permutations and combinations. And the fear may not even be real, but the mind just helps us, build it up to a level where we start thinking it to be real. We perceive it to be real. And that's when it's a problem, because it affects you, it affects your daily life, it affects the way you are. Just waking up in the morning doesn't feel as nice anymore when you're dealing with mental health conditions. And whether it's anxiety, stress, depression, it could be a variety of instances. But I think there really isn't a right time to seek therapy. Like I said, personally, I think everyone will benefit from therapy. Even if you're not going through a mental health concern today, I think having therapy really, really helps, because therapy has different branches, and you really have to understand which branch could work for you, and kind of let that help you in developing you as who you are as a person.
Exactly. As you mentioned, anxiety and panic, I believe everyone has it these days. Like in difficult situations, we get anxious, we get panic attacks. Yes, I believe that it is very common. These are very common in everyone. Yes.
Yeah, but we shouldn't normalize it, because I think it's also, it's come to a point where a lot of people say, okay, I'm feeling anxious today, it's fine, it doesn't matter. Because what happens with mental health as well, while the short-term ramifications may not be as detrimental, but the long-term ramifications of it being untreated are actually as bad as any physical ailments that you might have, for example. Right? I mean, anxiety and stress, chronic stress, could lead to a lot of cardiovascular issues, and there is science that backs it. So when you meet a therapist, for example, if the anxiety is really bad and you have been prescribed medication, medication assists you, it helps you. But a lot of times the stigma around that is, now I'm on antidepressants and I'm on SSRIs and I shouldn't be on these medications. Why am I on these medications? What will my parents think of me? Am I crazy? Is there something wrong with me? And I really think that this stigma needs to be broken, and people need to be made more aware of the fact that these are helping you and not really making you dependent on them. Again, it depends upon the diagnosis and the severity of the mental health issue, but a lot of them are manageable and in some cases even reversible with the right kind of therapy and a combination of therapy and medication.
Absolutely. And what do you think are the potential consequences when we suppress or ignore our emotions? And how can we avoid those pitfalls?
I think suppressing emotions in general, again, I'd probably go back to my pressure cooker analogy. The more you suppress something, the stronger it comes out, right? A simple thing like a relationship between a husband and wife. They say the healthiest relations are those that have arguments and have fights and sort out differences, unlike the ones that don't say anything to each other and say it's okay when it's not okay. I think you have to address the problems when they do occur, because without that, it's just going to be, you're completely bottling emotions inside of you. There's a way to express your emotions in a healthy way, and there's a way to express them in an unhealthy way. Now, you have to choose which of the two is something that you often resort to, right? So, for example, healthy emotional expression could be, self-awareness or having mindful communication. Make sure that you've got the timing and the context right of what you're trying to talk to the person about, and have a constructive communication rather than it being, negative and dismissive and unconstructive, right? Also have those emotional boundaries and have that, certain sense of emotional regulation. Which is important to have a healthy emotional expression of sorts. Now, on the other side, if you look at an unhealthy emotional outburst, right, we call it an outburst because there's a lack of self-control. You're so irritated about something that you don't care about the other person and care about what the other person feels, and you literally lash out at them, which comes out in the form of anger. It could come out in the form of frustration, and other, sort of methods. Disproportionate reactions. Unhealthy emotional outbursts really tend to involve reactions that are disproportionate to the situation. You may over-exaggerate when it is not required. If you don't have a controlled state of mind, if you've not really understood what the problem is, but you have decided to react and go from a 0 to 100 without really trying to figure out what happened. It leads to verbal, it leads to physical aggression, it leads to blaming, it leads to criticism, and it completely disregards boundaries, in terms of emotional boundaries or personal boundaries that the person may have set. You tend to overstep them when your emotions are not regulated. And last but not the least, it makes you feel stupid. It puts in a sense of regret. It brings in a sense of remorse, because it's too late then to feel like that, because you've already that outburst has already hurt somebody. And then when you cool down, you kind of realize that, okay, maybe what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have acted the way I did.
Yes. And like when we explode or when we express ourselves in a negative way, later on we feel the remorse, like you said, we feel bad, we feel guilty. But how can we forgive ourselves and others as part of our emotional processing journey?
I think forgiveness, again, is easier said than done, right? I think forgiveness comes with a certain sense of maturity. It comes with a certain sense of understanding and cognizance that what you've done indeed is wrong, right? For someone who is very adamant on their point, for example, if I have an argument with my wife and I say, I'm going to take my stance and say whatever I have done is right and she is wrong, I don't see how I will ever be in that mode of forgiving. I think to reach a sense of forgiveness, you have to first understand the situation in its entirety and take no shame in accepting that you were at fault. If you really potentially have done something wrong, ideally you should just go ahead and apologize. If you know that your actions have hurt somebody, or if what you said has hurt somebody or affected somebody. But again, if you're going to be defensive and if you're going to say, no, my way is correct, this is how I feel and I hence have processed my emotions in this way, I don't care about what the other person says, it's always going to be difficult for that person to acknowledge and in turn present an apology in that sense.
And what about forgiving others? Like, if we feel that someone has wronged us, for some people it takes a lot of time to forgive that person.
Correct.
Like there is no forgive and forget for some people, right? So they hold on to the grudge, and those emotions they keep on piling on, and then someday probably it explodes very badly.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I said in terms of. I think letting go is very critical, especially for those who deal with chronic mental health issues like anxiety and I would even maybe say depression or even ADHD, if at all that's the case. But you have to let go and reflect and learn from your emotions as well, because the more you cling on to certain emotions, especially, I mean, just to give you an example, it's very classic when there's a confrontation between a manager and a peer, right? Or even between two friends. Who takes the high ground? Who turns out to be the older one in the conversation is often a question that is asked, right? I think forgiving someone else is great for yourself, your own mental health, because you're letting go of certain emotions and not holding on to them. And I think processing that is extremely critical, and it's beautiful in a way when you've forgotten someone, you've avoided judgment, and at the same time you've kind of let go of the situation so that you're not tied into that problem or that situation anymore, and you've just accepted it for what it is, and you've been able to forgive the person again. But like I said, it's easier said than done. It doesn't come very naturally to a lot of people, but something that I think the more people practice forgiveness, and I would even go to say gratitude, which is the opposite, is actually supremely helpful to regulate one's mental health and overall mental well-being.
Okay, so how can we use our emotions as valuable sources of information and guidance in decision-making processes?
I think, emotions honestly are a great way to understand what you're going through and what you're feeling, which is why I was also mentioning earlier about labeling your emotions, right? And if we're able to channel these emotions in a much better way, if we're able to label these emotions to see how we're feeling when we're feeling, we're able to better address it with whoever we're bringing these up with on a timely basis. I think channeling emotions is something that comes with practice. Oftentimes the human nature is to have a knee-jerk reaction to situations. I always advise my colleagues when they have conversations, and especially these things are very, very typical during an appraisal season or when feedback is being given for to somebody. Oftentimes those feedback conversations become very sensitive in nature, right? Because sometimes you hear things that you don't want to hear, and then you get upset about it. But I always tell people to apply the methodology of pausing, stopping, responding, and moving forward. That's an ideology that I have always believed in and continue to believe in, because I really feel that gives you a sense of calm and composure to really tackle the situation at hand before you can go ahead. So pause, take a breath and figure out the situation that you're in. Stop and see what you're going to do next and respond accordingly. Again, I'm using the word respond and not react, because reactions are a little more knee-jerk, whereas responding is a little more thought through. And of course, once you've responded and once you've assessed the situation, to really move on from there.
And moving on is a very important thing, I believe, to do when we have to, for example, like you mentioned, letting go. So when we have to let something go, that means that we also have to move on from this particular situation.
Correct.
Right. So
Correct.
and I believe it's very we can say it that we will do it, but at the end of the day,
it's difficult.
It is very difficult to do, right?
It's difficult to do, Dipshi, because I feel as human beings we always need closure, right? We always need, for example, in a situation where you are expected to let go by saying that, if I keep on this journey, it's just going to bring me a lot of pain, for example, and you say, let it go. But at the same time, human beings are fine-tuned in a way where when we know that if we've started something and it ends, and we know that this has a definitive end, we feel a lot more secure, saying that, okay, now the story is over, the chapter is closed, I've got my answer, let's move on now. But I think in most cases, when we say move on, we want people to be the more mature one, for example. I mean, take an example, you're driving one day and someone bumps your car from the back. You have two options in front of you. One is that you get out of your car and you start screaming at the person behind. And, you say, park it on the side, let's go to the cops, let's, wait for some time, and they continue showering each other with all sorts of abuses. Or the other one is to just say, let it go, and oftentimes we don't do that, right? We what happens is we go into the spiral of, oh, how dare he bang my car? What does he think of himself? Who's going to pay for the damages? Oh my God, I have to go into an insurance, claim and all of these things. Of course, I mean, there are, when it is required to be done, it's fine. But if, for example, the person just nicked your car on the way, in terms of at a stationary signal just to go ahead of you. And we've seen that in a city like Bombay, that happens all the time. I haven't seen one car in Bombay that doesn't have a scratch or a dent on it, for example. Right? I mean, so you can just imagine the number of arguments that must have happened between each of those car owners at some point in their life. Again, maybe that, as an example, may not have been completely accurate, but I just feel that in some cases it's critical for us to let go and just move on. And it comes with practice. Again, like you said, it's not easy. Oftentimes we seek closure on things, but it's important to cultivate that habit of letting go, because the more you hold on to things, the more it affects you in the long run.
Yes, it happens that way, that sometimes we say that we have moved on, but then deep inside we still hold on to that one little
We've not. Correct.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
It becomes very difficult to move on, and we
Correct.
in sometimes we keep thinking of the same situation over and over again, but then we keep saying ourselves, yes, we're moving on. But like you said, it's very difficult. So what are some constructive ways to cope with and process grief and loss?
I think with grief and loss, it's a very individual coping mechanism. I know of people who have coped with grief and loss extremely well, to a point where they had kind of prepared themselves for what's to come. I think coping mechanisms for grief and loss, especially when the grief and loss is unexpected, becomes a lot more difficult. When you suddenly lose a loved one, or a family member or a friend, out of the blue, I mean, completely unexpected. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe it was a health emergency. It obviously becomes very difficult. And I really think that in times of grief and loss, you have to seek support. There is grief counselors are a legitimate thing, and there is a reason why most people in general don't deal very well when it comes to death. There is a natural fear that human beings have of death. Yes. And I've in my life, I've spoken to very few people who don't have a fear of dying. If you ask anybody, everybody has a fear of death, because it's uncertain, right? And it comes with a certain sense of, oh, how have I lived my life? Whether I've lived my life to the fullest? What if I die tomorrow? Yes. So there's a whole lot of uncertainty on that. But I think one of the most constructive ways to deal with grief and loss is to talk, is to share, is to and of course to be near near and dear ones, because they're the ones who will see you through. And like many things in life, grief and loss are also temporary. After a certain point, everybody moves on, right? But it's about moving on in the right direction, and making sure that you are not moving on only to move on, but again, there has been a certain sense of closure, there has been a certain sense of acceptance before you come to terms with the grief and loss. I mean, see, for example, it's inexplicable. For example, the loss of, for a parent, the loss of a child, it's inexplicable. The loss of a parent for a child, for example, it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to relate to it unless you have been through it yourself.
Yes.
Thankfully for me, I have not been through that situation, so it's very difficult for me to understand what someone goes through in a situation like this. I mean, I have seen many of my colleagues, my friends, people within my extended circle lose a loved one, and it happened a lot during COVID-19, and we all know of someone who we've lost during the pandemic, right? And it's very difficult to come to terms with grief, but I think you have to have a very strong coping mechanism, and of course, you have to confide and you have to speak to a licensed practitioner and a therapist or a grief counselor to really help you turn the tide, because without that, you're just going to marinate more and more in your own anxiety, in your fears, in your self-doubt, in your negativity about the entire situation. I really feel seeking help is perhaps the most constructive way to cope with grief and loss.
Communication is very important, right? So let's talk about some of the activities that can help us process and release our pent-up emotions.
I think with activities, for me personally, I think any form of exercise, any form of immersion in a hobby, is the most beautiful way that you can release pent-up emotions. For example, if you're an angry person, go to the gym and just keep hitting a punching bag. Do some kickboxing, do some sparring, do some mixed martial arts. It's really going to help you take away some of that built up, energy and built up anger that you have, within yourself. Talk, like I said, and I've been using this in all of the conversations so far, is speaking to someone is one of the best ways to channel your emotions. And again, like I said, not a friend or a well-wisher necessarily, but a licensed practitioner, in this case, a therapist or a counselor. It really helps you open up some of the emotions that you have lying dormant in you. Because what happens is that through your life, I mean, if say for example you're 40 years old today, for 40 years, if you've had a certain mechanism of coping with emotions and stress, and if you've not really let that out anywhere, or you've not spoken to anyone about it, it is just curdling inside of you all that while. And someday it's going to come out in the form of an outburst, or it's going to come out in the form of a panic attack or anxiety or whatever it is. But you need to speak to someone to channel that, so that they can also guide you in terms of how you not only necessarily open up about things, but how do you also deal with certain situations that may arise because of that, as and when it comes in. For example, one of the other ways that I have known for people to release emotions is through journaling, or is through writing. People tend to write blogs, they tend to write, they journal in their diaries, in terms of experiences, in terms of emotions, in terms of what has happened. They take to, for example, writing blogs about certain experiences that they've had. They share those experiences with people. So like I said, communication, whether it is through a therapist, whether it is through a blog, whether it is writing, down a journal, these are some other outlets in which I feel, releasing healthy emotions or releasing pent-up emotions can be channeled.
Like I also write, like I also journal, I keep a journal, and I write about whatever is going on in my mind. So I pen down those emotions, and yes, it makes you feel a lot better. Like once you write it down, then like it's a different light feeling you get after that. Yes. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ashutosh. So with this, we come to the end of today's session.
Sure.
Thank you so much for your insights. So would you like to share some more valuable suggestions with our listeners?
I think, not really a suggestion, Dipshi, but more of an advice that, mental health there's a certain amount of fragility with, when it comes to mental health, and no two people's mental health is the same, right? Because
absolutely.
Mental health is a snowball. It happens over a period of time. It's based on several factors, including your exposure to things in life, your upbringing, any trauma that you would have perhaps faced in your upbringing or otherwise. And there are a lot of factors for what contributes to good mental health or bad mental health, right? But I think ignoring it, whether it's good or bad, is detrimental. And I would strongly recommend for anyone who's listening, if you feel that you need to seek therapy and if you're ready for it, by all means, please do. I think India has evolved tremendously with regards to mental health infrastructure and support as well.
Yes.
But definitely do give it a shot because it does help. And it's definitely something that I would recommend to anyone who's out there. And remember, you're not alone, because I know a lot of people say this. Most foundations and institutions that advocate good mental health and mental health support will always say, you're not alone. But I can't emphasize more on how important this statement is. You really are not alone. There are many out there who perhaps don't even know that they're going through a mental health situation or a problem. But please seek guidance because that most certainly will help you and help you lead a more healthy and happy life in general.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Ashutosh, for joining us today.
It was a pleasure, and I hope the listeners are able to benefit from some of the suggestions that I've shared or some of the anecdotes that I've shared.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, and hope to connect with you soon on probably a different topic this time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure,
Bye-bye.
absolutely.
Have a great.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.